Well, welcome back in, guys. We're going to take some time now and look at the questions that you have texted in for Mike. We may do a couple of the ones that were sent to Sean as well. So, Mike, you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. How would you respond to skeptics who ask why Jesus didn't appear to other enemies besides Paul, people like Pilate or Caiaphas, after the resurrection?
I'll let Sean take that one.
Sean?
Oh. Well, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't tell us, right? So all we can do is speculate. And so I would just say, historians, we have questions. It's like I heard John Meyer, who just died a couple of days ago. He's a historian of Jesus who taught at Notre Dame. And I heard him at a lecture once. He said, doing history is like, in a sense, playing cards. It's like you're dealt a hand of cards, and you always wish you had more cards. You wish the cards in your hand were better, but you got to play the hand you've been dealt. And so when we're studying the historical Jesus, we have sources. We have like the Gospels, we have Paul's letters, we have New Testament literature. We got some non-Christian sources of the period. We wish we had more sources. We wish some of the sources we had said more about Jesus. But you got to play with the hand you've been dealt. And it's not just that way with Jesus. It's that way with all ancient figures, all ancient figures. We've lost so much just because it just hasn't been preserved in the literature. So, what we have informs us a lot about Jesus and informs us a lot about what happened afterward. The fact is he did appear to Paul, or at least Paul had an experience he believed was an appearance of the risen Jesus to him. And that's quite profound because, Paul wasn't just an unbeliever. I mean, he was out actively persecuting the church. He was actively arresting Christians, pursuing them, arresting them, throwing them into prison, consenting to their execution. I mean, that's animosity there. I mean, that's worse than what you're seeing between Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump, And it is far more likely that Pelosi would join the Trump 2024 campaign team than it would be for Paul to reverse course from persecuting Christians to all of a sudden he becomes one. And now he is actively being persecuted by those he was representing before, and he even dies. I mean, he's stoned, he's imprisoned, he's persecuted, whipped, endures all of that. So, I mean, that shows he had some sort of an experience that he truly believed was the risen Jesus appearing to him. That's something that virtually every skeptic, no matter how skeptical, will grant. Even those who deny the existence of Jesus will say that Paul had an experience he was sincerely convinced was the risen Jesus appearing to him. And so it's like, all right, I might not be able to explain why Jesus did not appear to Pilate, but he did appear to Paul. And that's huge.
All right, along those lines, what's the difference between the witnesses and martyrs of the Christian faith and the Islamic faith? Why believe one over the other?
Well, I wouldn't say you have to believe one over the other. My point isn't that when you endure persecution for your faith, or when you endure or suffer martyrdom for your faith, that doesn't mean what you believe is true. It does mean you believe it's true, okay? And so that shows the disciples weren't lying. They sincerely believed Jesus had appeared to them. So, if I die as a martyr for faith, it's because I believe it's true, not because I know it's true. But the disciples, they would have known whether it was true. Whereas Muslims who die for their faith, they don't know it's true. It'd be just like Christians. And Muhammad did not die as a martyr. And he was the only one who had the alleged visions in which the angel Gabriel revealed the Quran to him. None of his disciples did. So it's only one man's testimony. In the case of Muhammad, the rest were willing to endure. They didn't endure persecute. They persecuted, but they were martyred because they believed Muhammad. The disciples were enduring persecution and willing to endure martyrdom for what they believed to be true. They either knew it was true or false.
Yeah. You'd have thought that one of the disciples, if they invented the story, at least one of them would have, when their life was on the line, said, we made this all up, to save their skin, but not one of them did.
Yeah, you would think so.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not even a hint. There's not even a report out there that any of them did.
Right. Yep. All right. In your opinion, who is the best skeptic of the resurrection that you've interacted with?
That I've interacted with. So that would have to be Bart Ehrman. I don't think he has the best arguments of the skeptics I've interacted with. But I'd say Bart Ehrman. Ehrman is the most influential skeptical New Testament scholar in the world. He is an atheist. He teaches at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We've had 7 public debates. 6 of them have been, like regular debates. One was a written debate. We had one back in April that was 8 hours long. Longest one I've ever done. Before then, the longest one I think was 4 hours. Most of them are about an hour and a half to 2 hours. I've had 36 public debates. But this one was 8. Well, I say 8 hours, but we did take a lunch break and a couple bathroom breaks. So it was only 7 hours. But that was fun. But yeah, I'd say he was the best because he gives a lot of the standard arguments given by skeptics, but he is a fantastic communicator and a good debater. So I'd say he's been the toughest for those reasons.
Who do you think has the best arguments against the resurrection?
I would probably, that's really hard. I don't think there are any really good arguments against the resurrection. The one I'd probably go with, and I say this with a catch to it, I guess you could say, a caveat. Maybe Geza Vermesh. Geza Vermesh died a few years ago. He was a Jewish scholar, and he had a book on the resurrection. I think it was the last one before he died. It's a short book. And so he goes over some evidence and he says, all right, let's formulate hypotheses. And he gives 6 hypotheses, okay? And one is Christ rose from the dead. And then another is, so the Christ rose from the dead. He said, yeah, but, only really believers go with this. And that's his refutation. It's like, that's not a refutation. Yeah. What do you?
By definition, you believe in the resurrection if you're a believer.
Right. And then he says, and then you have your inveterate skeptics over here who won't believe no matter what. Well, we can just push them aside. Well, no, you can't really, because you can be an inveterate skeptic. In other words, nothing is going to convince you otherwise, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. You've got to interact with the arguments they're giving, right? I mean, a Christian could believe for all the wrong reasons. Well, my mom and dad believe, so I believe. But if they believe, they still believe the truth. You might believe for the wrong reasons, but it doesn't mean that what you believe is wrong. That's a genetic fallacy, right? So he was committing the genetic fallacy in a sense. And then he gave then there are 4 others, lies, hallucinations, and I forgot the other 2. And he says, none of these work. So I'm just left with don't know what happened. So, but I think his is the best because I think if you're a skeptic, you can be honest and say, it's not hallucinations. They weren't lying. They really had some experiences. I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't know what happened. I don't think it was resurrection because my worldview won't allow it. You can be an honest skeptic that way. My worldview won't allow it. I don't believe God, so I don't believe resurrection. So it's not hallucination. I don't like any of the natural explanations. I just don't know what happened. I think that's probably the best explanation.
Just to say, I don't know.
Yeah, to say, I don't know.
Okay.
But nobody's really saying that today. Yeah. They all want to come out and say, well, this is what happened. Okay, what's your evidence for it? You think hallucinations? What's your evidence for it? And you know what? There's some wisdom in here. If nothing else I've said seems wise, take this. So we as Christians we're on the defense a lot. Okay, so we say Christ rose, Christianity is true. Yeah, but what about this? What about this? Okay, well, that's true. We got to answer those things. If we're saying something, and it's our responsibility to defend it, provide evidence for it. But as soon as they come back and say, well, no, Jesus didn't rise. Well, what do you think happened? Well, they were hallucinating. All right, what's your evidence for it? Now they bear the burden of proof. Whatever position you take, you bear the responsibility when you're in a discussion with someone. If you say this is what you think happened, then you bear the responsibility for doing it. But we don't usually do that with another. So we'll defend Christianity, but when they say they take their view, well, the resurrection was just a metaphor, we need to be responding back. Okay, so what's your evidence for that?
Yeah. All right. This question is it better to be a sincere non-Christian who has never heard the gospel rather than a non-Christian who has heard the gospel and deliberately rejected it? If so, what implications does this have on missionaries who go to the unevangelized nations?
Good question. Well, certainly I'd have to say it would be better off if you were a non-Christian who never heard the gospel and died in that sense. Than being a non-Christian who heard it and rejected it. So what about missions? Well, we do missions because God commands us to do them. We share the gospel because God commanded us to do it. And if we're going to be in obedience, then it's up to him. Now, I don't know how the election and predestination and all of that works. Like I said, I'm not a Calvinist, but I have to acknowledge that there are certain scriptures that seem to suggest a form of Calvinism is true. And I don't know how it all works together. I don't claim to know that. And I think that no matter what position you take, there are some difficulties in it. Whether you're Calvinist, an Arminian, or a Molinist, there's some difficulties, difficult questions that you're going to find difficult to answer. But still, no matter what your belief is, God has still commanded us to share the gospel. So if we're going to be in obedience, we need to do that and let God work about the theological difficulties.
All right, this question says, you talked about if there is no God, evil isn't punished. Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17 people. At the end of his life, he got baptized and was a Christian. Like the murderers on the cross next to the thief, Jeff will likely go to heaven if he believed in his heart. But what about his victims and their families? There is no justice for them if Jeff gets into heaven.
Well, sure, there's justice for him. Christ paid it. Christ paid for the penalty for that before those people were ever born.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. All right, let's see here. This says, how can I deal with the objection overcoming the object of, how can I deal with the objection? The church is full of hypocrites, and I don't want to be a hypocrite.
Well, you're good for not joining then, because you would be. No, I mean, sure, the church is full of hypocrites. Yeah, none of us are perfect, and it's unfortunate that many in the church do not adorn the name of which they claim to follow. But I've typically found that the church, with all of its flaws, is still better than the unregenerate. And I'll tell you this, without mentioning names, I know a number of prominent atheists who have said, even though they are staunch atheists who were once Christians, they miss the church. They told me that. They miss the fellowship with other believers that they have not been able to experience with those outside of the church. They said, Christians have this very special thing about being able to fellowship, and there's a camaraderie there that you just don't experience outside the church. And, it's cool. I flying out here yesterday, the girl was sitting next to me. We got talking, never met her before. Turns out she's a believer flying out here for some small conference. And it's like, well, that's my sister. And it's like, this is cool. So, I mean, there's something special about being a part of the body of Christ.
Do you want to answer some of Sean's questions?
I'm not, if I don't know the answer or have an informed opinion, I'll just pass on it, but I'll try.
All right, how about this one? Is there a good study guide for apologetics that would be suitable for a men's small group study?
Yeah. So William Lane Craig several years ago wrote a book, Reasonable Faith. It's an excellent book. It's probably like a graduate level reading. So then he came out with Reasonable Faith Light, and it's called On Guard. And that has a study guide to it.
Okay.
So that's one thing that you can do, and that's a really informed piece. Of course, Lee Strobel's books, The Case for Christ, The Case for Faith, The Case for a Creator. I believe there are study guides, I know there are, for all three of those that you can do for a small group. So that's good. I'm sure there are those are the ones that just immediately come to mind. Well, you mentioned I Don't Have Enough Faith to Become an Atheist by Frank Turk and Geisler, and that should be good. I'm sure there are plenty of others, but I know that the three Case for Christ, or Case for Faith, Case for Creator, those are there. William Lane Craig's On Guard. That's depends how deep you want to get.
Sure.
The On Guard.
Yeah.
If you're really into more like existence of God, New Testament stuff, that's going to be really good for you. But all the Strobel stuff's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Do you have a favorite apologist?
Well, yeah, I'm going to have to just say Gary Habermas and William Lane Craig, because they've both served as like very close mentors of mine. I've been really blessed with them. Gary mainly. I mean, without him, I don't know that I'd be a Christian today. He was really patient when I had my doubts. I experienced doubts, and he really worked with me through those right after grad school, at the end of grad school. Then right after that, there was no email, so the only way we discussed was phone calls, and I can't tell you how many hundreds of hours we spoke on the phone. I can't believe he spent that much time with me, and I mean, I'd never spend that much time with someone now, but he did, and so I'd say I'm a Christian today because of him. And William Lane Craig mentored me in debate, and there's in fact, Jan, his wife, told me I'm the only one that he has privately mentored in debate, because he really believed he saw something in me and did that. It's like I feel real honored for that. So those two would be my favorite by far.
Okay, all right.
You know.
Speaking of doubt, what advice would you give to somebody who is experiencing doubts? I mean, even severe doubts, to the point where they're thinking, I'm really not sure that I can honestly keep on going as a Christian.
Well, I feel your pain. Serious. And I'd say short answer, go to my website, and I have an article on there, I'm a Doubting Thomas. Or you can also go to my YouTube channel. Again, just go to YouTube, type in I think it's YouTube/Mike Licona official, something like that. And then look for playlists. Or you just look playlist and type, look for doubt. I've got, I don't know, maybe 7 videos on doubt. The most popular one is where my wife and I are discussing it. So that's there. But I also have a 2 lectures on there about doubt. But that aside now, I'd say recognize that doubting is normal. You've got biblical characters, famous ones like Abraham and John the Baptist, who were doubters, and look at how God responded to them, especially how Jesus responded to John the Baptist when he was doubting. He didn't put him down. He actually provided evidence. He encouraged him and complimented him while John is doubting. So, and John saw more than I've seen. So if Jesus responded to him in that way, I can't think that he gets mad at us when we doubt. And by the way, not only Christians doubt, but atheists doubt. C.S. Lewis doubted when he was an atheist. Antony Flew, perhaps the most influential atheist philosopher of the latter part of the 20th century, he doubted every day when he was an atheist. So doubting is normal. There's so many things I can say, but it's on those lectures. And the article that I pointed you to.
After Jesus was resurrected and spent the 40 days here on earth, at the end of Acts 28, it says, now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. Verse 28 says, and when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Mm-hmm. And then that's when Jesus gives the Great Commission. It always amazed me. Here's guys that were with him for 3+ years, watched everything that he did, heard him teach, saw him go to the cross. Now they're experiencing him as the resurrected Jesus, and yet somehow they doubt.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we read that and we think about doubt in terms of, well, we know what doubt means in English, but it means something a little different in Greek.
Okay.
And when we understand what it means in Greek and how Matthew uses that word elsewhere, it brings a whole lot more insight to that text. Now, what's happening is the Greek word there for doubt is distadzo. Dis means two, and so distadzo means to think two things. It only appears on one more occasion in the Gospel of Matthew, and that's when Jesus is walking on water and they see him, and Peter says, "Lord, if that's you, call me out." And so Jesus says, "Come," and he starts walking. He's like, "Man, this is cool." And then he sees the waves and he starts to doubt and worry, and he starts to sink, and he says, "Lord, help me." And he pulls him and he says, "Why did you doubt?" Distadzo. Well, wait a minute. He had enough faith to step out on the water, right? But what he's out on the water and he's saying, "Man, this is really cool, but how am I doing this? Oh, it's Jesus. But if I sink, I die. It's deep water here. I die. I drown." He's thinking two things.
So
Distadzo. So here's what happened. And I have this all in my book, Why Are There Differences in the Gospels? I deal with the differences in the resurrection narratives, and there are quite a bit of them. And I deal with them in a bunch in the Gospels. Now, in Luke, there's something similar. When Jesus meets with them in Luke 24, it says, they were unbelieving. The Greek word there is apistos, which means no faith. Unbelief. Out of unbelief, they were joyful and marveling. Now, wait a minute. What? Joyful and marveling, they were unbelieving. What does that mean? That seems like a contradiction. Okay? Well, what's happening here is Jesus, the worst thing had happened. He died. They were sorrowful. And now the best thing is like he's there. And it's like, yeah, I remember when my mom died. It's like, oh man, this is rough. But what if just a few days later, after we buried her, what if she appeared to me in bodily form, coming back from heaven, and I hug her and I'm able to touch her and I smell her, and it's like, Mom, it's like, it's
joyful, but how can this be?
How can this be? Unbelief with joy and marveling, amazement. And it's like when it says that they were unbelieving out of joy and marveling, it's not like they got arms crossed and pressed lips. I don't know about this. No, it's like their eyes are filled with water, their jaws are dropped, and it's like, this is amazing, but how can this be? It's like a walk-off home run at the bottom of the seventh in Game Series of the World Series. Unbelievable. That's what Luke is saying by apistos, unbelief. This is what Matthew is saying. Some worship him, but others doubted. They had two thoughts. It's like, this is amazing, but how can it be? Gotcha. Same thing.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, last question. What else are you working on now? I know you've got a couple more books you're working on.
Yeah. So I'm real excited about this one. So in 2017, Oxford University Press published my book, Why Are There Differences in the Gospels? It's an academic book. It's groundbreaking. The leading classicist on Plutarch in the world, Christopher Pelling, who taught at Oxford, just retired a couple years ago. He said this is just a groundbreaking cross-disciplinary study. You've got several major New Testament scholars calling this significant volume. I come out with a fresh approach to looking at gospel differences. So as I lectured about this all over the world, and it gets kind of detailed and in depth, they would say, can you put the cookies on the lower shelf? We need this in something that's a little simpler to understand. So I wanted to move on from that into my next project, but when you get a number of things like this, and then you get emails from people who said this saved my faith. It's like, wow, I guess I better stick with this a little longer. So 2 years ago, I know the chaplain for the Atlanta Braves front office, and he said, so they invited me to come do a study with the front office, not the players. And I said, okay. I said, but I want to do 8 weeks. 8 weeks? You do 8 weeks? Why? I said, well, I've been working on a more popular level version for suitable for small groups for the layperson, a non-academic, not so heavy for gospel differences, and I'd like to use you guys as a pilot group. And they said, okay. So I found some things, like some of the chapters were too long, and I took them and divided them, so it's like 11 chapters, and I went through it with them, and it's like all the questions that I'd been asked for clarification over the years, I was able to include those in, and they ate it up. So they gave me like free tickets behind home plate, and they gave me a bat signed by Hank Aaron. I was like, whoa. So it's like, this is cool. So I worked on that, and I'm in the last 2 weeks now of a second focus group where I'm going through it again. It's a group of 200 adults, ages 60 to early 90s. And so very conservative, and I'm going through it, and I've had to make a couple adjustments where I say, oh, yeah, I need to address this a little earlier. So I'm hoping to have that whole thing done sometime in January. It will be great, easy to understand for individuals who aren't academics, and suitable for small group use as well. And hopefully that'll be out next year in the fall.
What's the name? Do you know yet?
I don't know
Don't
yet.
know yet.
I've got a couple of possibilities, but like if I don't use it for this one, I'll use it for this one I'm thinking of down the line, and I'm not going to share it because I don't want anyone to steal it.
Gotcha. All right. And you said you and Gary Habermas are working on a second version of...
We haven't started yet, but in the spring, so I'm hoping to finish up this thing I just mentioned in January. And then he's working on finishing up the editing for volume 2 of his 4-volume magnum opus on the resurrection, which together there will be about 5,000 pages between 4 volumes. So he's about finished volume 2, and as soon as he wraps that up sometime in the spring, then he said, we will work on the second edition of the Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. Yeah.
Sounds good. Mike Licona, guys.
Oh, hey, can I throw in one more thing real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I mentioned if you'd like to study at Houston Christian University, we just changed our name like 4 weeks ago. It was Houston Baptist University. It's been HBU since when we started in the early 60s. But it's more, you got people from other denominations that teach in there. And so it's Houston Christian University. But if you'd like some information, you go to they haven't changed the URL yet, hbu.edu/defend. And you can find out about the programs and apologetics there, hbu.edu/defend.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.